Welcome to the Curious Builder Podcast. I'm Mark Williams, your host. I'm here today with Kate Regan from The Sitting Room, owner and operator. Kate, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me. This is so fun.
I know, even though our offices are like 100 yards apart, I'm glad that you're still willing to come on to our podcast for us, make it official.
Out of the bubble.
I know. How long have we worked together now?
I think 7, 8 years, maybe.
I can't believe it's been that long.
I know.
So, yeah. Kate, you own an interior design studio.
I do.
And we've worked together for this many years, but I actually don't know your origin story. One of the enjoyable parts about having you on is I'd like to hear how you started in design. Like, how did you get to where you are now?
For sure. So I started in my mid-20s. I was planning on going back to school for social work. I was going to get my master's. And I wanted just a fun, creative job while I was going back to school. And so this furniture store and interior design firm in Uptown was hiring. And on a whim, I went in, was hired, started working there, and just like fell in love with the environment. And so I was selling furniture for a while. And then the principal designer landed these big projects and said, I need a design assistant. I'm going to give you a try. Threw me in. I had no training, totally not prepared. And this guy was very fun, very energetic, and would just take anything on. So threw me in. And after a couple of years, I was running my own projects and just learning a ton.
Was that commercial or residential, or what
It was all residential.
Okay.
Yeah.
So new homes, remodels, or what kind of residential projects were you working on?
It was more like refresh. I mean, we did some remodels, some really cool projects. We had a private island in Canada that we did.
Oh my.
He had some really cool connections. So I learned a ton from him. I mean, probably made a lot of mistakes, but he was super patient. He was a great mentor. And so I did that, and then learned, all aspects of the business, from visual merchandising, went to markets, design work, of course, and then decided after 4 years I was newly engaged, and my future husband said, why don't you start your own business? And I was like, I'd never really thought about doing that, and just kind of took the leap.
How old were you at that time?
I think I was 27.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And I'm like 29 now.
Well,
so
obviously.
It's like, it's just lapse. But so I just took this leap and said, I'm going to try it.
Mm-hmm.
And I started out kind of working out of our basement and was generating leads and figuring out how I wanted to run the business. And then I had a remodeler that I'd worked with in the past and called me up and said, I'm looking to have a space and I want someone to share it with me. And so we had this little space in Deep Haven and said, let's, we'll have independent businesses, but we'll work out of the same space. And so I did that, and it was the best move. I mean, I had really good walk-ins that transitioned into big projects. Those clients then referred me to their friends. I can go back and picture these 5 different clients that sort of launched me into the successful business.
Isn't it amazing? I think they call them the silent salesman. It's people that are out there, banging the drum for your respective company that are essentially selling for you because of the experience that you gave them.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And how often would you see those people even today? I mean, are they still clients that continue?
Still clients.
Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing. After 20 years. I mean, I have one client that I remember doing her daughter's bedroom, and she was maybe 10, and now she's married, and I'm helping her with her house. So it's really cool to be in this business that long and retain those same clients.
I mean, obviously, from a business standpoint, it's nice to have residual clients and to have projects that continue. But on a personal level, it's got to be very rewarding to see families, when you met them, they either weren't married or they didn't have kids. And now in this case, you just told a story of this coming of age family where everything has changed. And now you're doing it for the next generation.
Yeah. And it's fun. I mean, she knew me before. I think I was newly engaged. Didn't have kids. She's watched my girls grow up, and my girls occasionally work. I have twin girls that are 16. They'll work at the store on a Saturday, and she's come in and seen them. So it's just fun to have that personal connection.
Do you think it's an overstatement saying that it seems like interior design, from my experience in working with interior designers, that it seems to be a more personal business than transactional? Is that a fair statement?
100%. Absolutely.
And what do you think? Why do you think it is that way compared to other industries? I mean, I think there's plenty that are, but let's just narrow it down to like building and the trades, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like you hire a plumber, he comes and he does a plumbing job, and
Sure.
he does a great job. But it's more of a transaction. It's not,
right.
Your water's on, your water's off,
Yeah.
and it does other things. I mean, obviously they have to be competent in their field, but it seems like interior design is much more personal.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the process is longer. I mean, we often start with, the architectural plans and see it through to the end of a new build. That can be over a year. So we spend a lot of time together. I think that's part of it. But also, I think maybe some of the clients that we attract maybe are also, we're open to that. We want to have that established relationship. And I don't know that it's like that for every designer necessarily, but I would say in our experience, it certainly is. And we really enjoy what we do, so we make the process fun. And I think then the clients are enjoying themselves, and, you just develop a really nice rapport and level of trust.
I think it speaks also to how intimate the relationship can get. Not that it is with every single client to that depth,
Right.
but I think it goes as deep as they want it to go, because the more you know of a client, the more you know what their needs is, their lifestyles.
Sure.
I mean, obviously, if you have young kids, you're probably pitching different fabrics or different textiles that are going to hold up better to, the next decade of destruction, right?
Yeah. Well, even just how, meeting with the husband and wife, right? You've seen that, and it's that dynamic and trying to navigate that. And you learn so much about how people live and how they function, and which I find fascinating. Back to my background, I have a degree in psychology initially. So
that has got to be very helpful.
So for me, it's really interesting to just kind of analyze how, I think how they would view this process, or how they'd like to move forward with things. So yeah, it kind of comes full circle.
I feel like I have an honorary degree in psychology, but you have a formal one, so I'll defer to you now in all things. Well, I should, obviously. Designer rules the roost.
Right, exactly.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, it is amazing, as we often will say in these meetings, right? Because it's, very personal building a home. You are, building whether it's a high-end custom home or remodel, it's still your home. It's where you live. And so people are, if they're living in the space while you're doing it, there's a heightened sense of, the awareness of what you're doing in their space. And if it's a new home, oftentimes the label, the dream home, or all their goals and anything that they've saved or clipped for the last however many years is being isolated. Like, I really want to do it right this time.
Yep.
I often, when I build a home, will tell people, there's no such thing as anything being perfect. And so you understand that, like, this is art, we're creating it with you. How do you, when people come to you and they have this idea, because a lot of how a home looks, and I often will tell my clients this, is like, I can build you a beautiful home. And architecturally, when we partner with architects and designers, it's really important. But the feeling of the home, I feel like, has a lot to do with what you do, the interior design side of it. Yeah. How do you reassure clients that they're going to feel, whether they're spending a large amount or a small amount? What are some things that you've experienced over your career where you're like, you need to trust me, and obviously you have to gain that trust, but I guess, how have you seen that process unfold? Because what I'm saying, people will feel so, sometimes they get very tense in wanting to be perfect right out of the gate. How do you combat that exactly?
We experience this all the time, and I've done this for 20 years now, and what I encourage clients to do is just respect the process, right? We've done the homework, we know what you want, we know the direction, we have a really good sense. Now trust that it's going to all fall into place, and you're going to go through bumps in the road if it's new construction, where, say, the cabinets go in, but they're not finished, and they get nervous because it doesn't look like how they anticipated. So really being able to trust the process, trust the designer, and then when it's all said and done, we're there to make sure that it's exactly how they want it. If we have to tweak things and change things, we're always willing to do that. I feel like design is always evolving, and so it's the process, I guess. And
how often, kind of jump to the end before we get to the beginning, classic Mark Williams. I
think we're still at the origin.
Origin story. We're going to go right to the end.
Right.
How often, once a house is completed, how long before you hear from the client again saying they want a question I never asked you before, like, I need, new pillows, or I need a new update? What would be like a normal time frame before people start accessorizing and updating again?
I feel like it continues.
So it never really stops.
It really doesn't. It gets to a point, obviously, oftentimes where they say, okay, we're done. We've, it feels finished, and we don't want to spend any more money on this.
Right.
But, it's definitely with a new build. we're finishing one right now, and we'll be doing window treatments and, some of those things that they didn't need initially. But as they live in the house, they realize, they have a need for privacy in certain rooms, or they really don't know until they live there. And so then their needs kind of evolve.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, we stay in touch with them, after 30 days, after they're moving in. We'll handle kind of a punch list, if you will. And then at 1 year, we'll come back and check in. And we'll check in with them periodically as well, just as, we see them around town or we see them at our events. But, after, let's say, 2 years, it definitely is quieter from a building standpoint. They've moved in. If they have questions on something, obviously. But a lot of times if someone has, let's say, a basement unfinished, it'd be like, I would say anywhere between 3 to 5 years after we finish the initial build, where we'll get that call and say, hey, we'd like to bring you back to do, finish off the space. So it seems like it's somewhat analogous to what you do, except yours is more continuous. Like the relationship never really stops.
Right. And when it can be small things. I mean, I have clients that will text me and say, I want a new centerpiece for my table for the holidays. What do you think of this? I mean, there's a lot of that consulting because they do, at the end of it, hopefully they really appreciate the vision that you had and they trust you. And so any decision that they make regarding their home, as small as it may be, they consult with us, which is great. I love keeping that connection. So
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Going back to where you were in Deep Haven, so was it a retail store? Was it only interior design? Like you mentioned that was kind of a breakout decision for you to be there. Sure. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
So it was a tiny space next to a gas station or an auto body shop. It had an outdoor bathroom. I mean, it was like tiny, but this remodeler, super talented, and just decked it out with reclaimed wood floors, beautiful millwork. So it was kind of like this unexpected jewel box right on a busy intersection, so good exposure. And I had some I had a furniture vignette, and so that would be what would draw people in. They'd see something in the window, come in, and then I could talk to them about who I was and what I was doing. I think I was there for maybe a year, and then outgrew that space, hired my first employee, saw the business was growing. That was around the time that I got pregnant with twins, and my life was crazy, and so I thought this is a good time to bring someone else on. And so I hired my first designer, and then the business grew organically, and then I hired another designer, and it just kind of has grown over the years, and now I have a team of 10.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've seen him. You're very talented, and it's sometimes when I have a project, it's hard for me, as a partner of yours, to which designer is the right fit. A lot for me ultimately, because they're all talented. And I've worked with most of the people at your studio. It's a lot of it ends up being, who do I think is the right personality match, and then checking in with you, right, and saying hey, who has time in their schedule to take this client? This is roughly how long it's going to take. Because I assume you have to manage. It leads us to a question that that I'm curious about. How do you manage 10 designers? I mean, how does their workflow get managed?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I have 5 designers, then I also take on projects myself. So then we have a great team of assistants and expediters and all the support people behind the scenes. But personality is key. Yeah. I mean, first, workload. Obviously, we need to make sure that they're able to fully commit to that project. But again, going back to that psychology, I love, meeting a new client and hearing what they're looking for, just getting a sense of who they are. And I can usually within the first 30 seconds say, oh, this is a perfect job for Nan. This is perfect for, Hannah, whoever. So it's fun to be able to make that match. And on the flip side, we've had situations where maybe it wasn't a good match and the designer's feeling it and the client's feeling it, and they've been able to come to me and say, I really want to work with your firm, but this just isn't right. And we've made that transition. And everybody, I think when you've been in the business long enough, you realize that if it's not a good fit, it's not going to work for anyone. And so we've been able to kind of transition that over to somebody else. And
and we had that with you, actually. So I think in this, was it the 6 years we've been building with you? I think I've always essentially sat down with you and one of your designers, interviewed with the client, and it's always been a fit. And all that time and all those projects, we've never had anyone switch, but just recently we had somebody switch. Yeah. And it was really a neat process to watch, because at the end of the day, we have a responsibility to our client. Yep. And we're, in this case, they're a joint client, right? And so they're trusting, my recommendation of the sitting room, and And I loved how mature and how really ease, and really even the staff that was essentially determined that it wasn't a good fit for that client, they handled it extremely gracefully, at least from my perspective, and also the client. And then they transitioned to someone else in your firm, and it's been a great transition. And so I don't think that would happen as seamlessly as it did if there wasn't maturity, in the leadership role.
So true. Well, and just, I have great designers, right? I have 2 designers that have been in the industry for over 30 years. And then I have up and coming designers, and then I have design assistants right out of design school, still in their 20s. And you've kind of experienced, you're right up the road. So you pop in and you can see, there's a lot of different personalities, a lot of talent, and it's just a great collaborative environment. So I love it. I look back to when it was just me in that first small studio, and I really feed off of the energy of all the designers, and I learn from them. they learn from me. It's a really great.
How do you handle like the team building and then camaraderie between, the all the people that you work with?
I think the biggest thing, and we work in a kind of tight quarters, right? So we're all together, and it's like a family. There are days where somebody's in a bad mood, and we accept that. And I encourage communication. It sounds so basic, but really it's what makes it work. And if somebody's frustrated or it's not working their work style, and I encourage, come to me, let's talk about it, let's sit down. And so we've been able to just address things head on versus allowing things to fester. So it sounds pretty basic, but I think that's kind of how we make it work.
And I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, I have 5 people that work with, on our inner team, but I would imagine with 10, you get some of the younger ones that somehow, without even direction, kind of pair themselves with someone that may be older or more experienced, and you kind of feel like, hey, they're going out for coffee more often, or they seem to be chatting more often. Obviously, just like no different than in, let's say, high school or college, you end up kind of clicking with certain people, and then they kind of form their own relationship outside of even work. Has that happened?
Yeah, I think so. And it's interesting because I'll pair, the design assistants are paired with a designer, so they spend a lot of time together, and those designers are mentors to these, young design assistants. So, it's interesting to watch that and how they sort of figure out ways to work together. And definitely relationships are formed.
What is the path for people that are listening and interested in interior design? Well, I think you can go to school for it. You can obviously go to school for psychology.
Yep. and then I did go back to school for design while I was still working in the industry.
And pregnant and having a kid.
Totally.
So, why not? Do it all at the same time.
Totally.
So that, Let's take one of your junior assistants that is working with a more experienced designer. Walk us through that path. Like, how long does that mentorship program, if you will, last? And how do you know when they're ready to kind of take flight and lead their own projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. It varies certainly, but I have, just watching how the industry, where we are right now, all of the design assistants that I hire have a degree in interior design. So that is something that I look for. Yep. And then again, it's that hands-on training as a design assistant. They are learning so much under, the guidance of a senior designer. So it depends. But I would say at least 2 years. I think it's important because there's so many situations that we encounter that you can't even anticipate, right? We see that every project. We've been doing this
I'm on year 18 and I'm encountering something new, this week. And I'm like, wow, that would have been nice to know 18 years ago. And you still are learning it.
Yeah. So there's that. So it's like, I want to make sure they have that experience. So when they get to that point, but I also, with one of my up and coming designers, I've been working with her on some projects and we work together, and it's nice that I can allow them to have that independence and work on projects, but I'm still there to oversee it. If there's something that happens, they can come to me or another designer and we can talk through it and, get them on the path to success. So
I have to believe that just like any path, some people are more aggressively pursuing a certain destination than others, and some are maybe happy where they're at. Or walk me through, like, even like pairing a junior designer with a senior designer, that interview process has to play a role in who you're even pairing them with. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And for me too, because it's, we are a team of 10, but it's a small environment. Hiring the right person is critical. I have a new designer starting next month, and I'm really excited about her background. Nice. And I think she's going to be a really great addition. But it's something I really have to think about, not just in terms of their talent and what they can bring to the firm, but how they're going to fit into our culture and, work with the rest of the team.
How do you, transitioning a little bit, how do you network with other designers? You obviously have competition, like for instance, you probably end up doing about 40% of all or 50% of all our design work, right? So, and I have, maybe two main designers or houses that I work with, you being one of them, and it's relationship based. How do you, your work retail versus being builder and remodeler? I'd be interested to know, like, what's your split on those two? And then I've got a secondary question after that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So question on where we get our leads?
Yeah, where do you get your leads? And, how do you, how much of it is retail coming in off the store versus, partnering with somebody like ourselves, like a builder or remodeler?
It's interesting. I'm going to say it's probably 50-50.
Okay.
We do, as we've been doing more new builds and, focusing on the relationships that we have with builders, and it's repeat business that you get with builders, like with you. And so that's a really great way for us to generate new leads, but then having the retail store has been really key. So that's the other component when we moved to Excelsior. We have a studio, but then we also have a separate retail space on the main kind of retail avenue. So we get walk-ins there, but also, social media and parade homes. And then I would say maybe 30% is repeat business referrals, and that's the best, right? That's what we look for. So so when you moved from Deep Haven to Excelsior, why did you choose Excelsior? We outgrew the space. I wanted to be part of a retail community, or just even, I love the feel of Excelsior. It just has it's charming. It has its own vibe. It's authentic. It was 2010 when I moved, and Excelsior was really turning over. So it was perfect timing, and found this great space. It's in a historical building, so the space itself is really cool.
Do you know I actually looked at that building?
Oh, you did?
Before I ended up, because I'm just down the street from you, obviously. But I loved it. But at the time, it was just myself. So I was much too small to take that big of a space.
Right.
And so, but now, obviously, hindsight's 2020. I would love to be in that building. It's extremely charming.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because we took on the space on 2nd Street, and then we moved to the space on Water Street, became available, which is connected through the back hall, but it has its own entrance, which was ideal.
So you got 2010 on the main. Design. When did you get the Water Street one?
I think like 2015.
So 5 years.
I lose track. Yeah. Had that, and then we took a conference room upstairs. So we're slowly just kind of taking over this building because I don't want to move. It's just I can't imagine being in another location. So
if you had more space, would you bring in more designers, or would you bring in more like vignettes or more places to, house? I think one thing that people would be interested in knowing is how much time do you spend sourcing materials and then pitching it to clients like in your studio versus taking them, out to, the tile different showrooms or, countertop showrooms. Walk me through that process a little bit. Yeah.
So we try to do everything in-house. We make it easy for the client. So back to your question of what would I do with more space?
Yeah.
I feel like I've hit the sweet spot with the number of designers that I have and the size of the team. It allows us to still be really connected with all projects, for me to be connected with all the projects. Having more space, I think, would be amazing. We could spread out. It would be nice to have more, furniture on the floor, but also, just to have more space, I guess. But so we use our studio for working meetings. We'll have clients come in. We'll go to the tile showrooms. We'll go, select all of those building materials from various showrooms, bring them in, lay them out along with our, lighting and our fabrics and rugs so that they get to see the whole picture. It's hard for clients to make a decision when it's just isolated, right?
And so it's kind of like a storyboard, essentially.
Yeah.
I think that would go a long way to reassuring the client, too, that you're seeing their vision, right?
Yeah.
And how will you present multiple storyboards or like a either or? Because I know oftentimes you'll pitch something and they'll be like, yes, yes, no, yes, yes. How walk me through that presentation process. So you meet with them, you understand what they want.
Yeah.
They come in for that, first, sit down. They're going to see all their fabrics and stuff. How often do you actually have to switch things out?
It depends on the client, right?
Yeah, right?
I think we usually have a really good read after we've had our first consultations and sort of go through that lookbook that we put together.
Yes.
we sort of lead with what we think is our best. We lay it out, and then we always have backups just tucked away. So if a client, isn't reacting strongly to that, and, we're not getting the excitement, it's like, oh, well, how about this? Let's pull this in. So we're always ready for that, but we find that it's less distracting for the client if we can kind of lead with a comprehensive plan versus showing multiple options that they have to choose
and
from.
Are you watching their face? Like,
Absolutely.
Right, because I imagine that their face kind of lights up and they're kind of like, you get me, you see me.
And I'm the one, when I'm working with clients, if they just kind of, and I will push and say, do you like that? Do you love that?
Right.
Okay, if you don't love that, let's find something else.
Right.
Like,
they almost need to be encouraged to say no.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, the last thing we want to do is build you a beautiful home and then, Minnesota nice. You never said no the whole time. You just said maybe a lot. We don't want that.
Exactly. No.
Right.
So I make sure that the clients are fully engaged and that they're really love it.
Can you tell me a funny story? Like, have you ever had anywhere like you have someone that was just like, yes, and like slap the table or stand up? Or have you ever had, just something ridiculous? Has anything ever happened like that where they're just like,
my gosh,
you nailed it?
We've had clients cry because they were so happy with the results,
nice.
which
That's
is the
sweet.
Best, right?
Yeah.
Where so we've had that side of it. We probably have had the enthusiasm.
Yeah.
It might even be more me and my team kind of doing that too, where we just get so excited about what we do. But yeah, it's an emotional thing.
It's super
your
emotional.
home. And so especially when you're working with clients that are very visual and when they see it come together, it's exciting. And so the meetings get louder and more animated, and I love that.
I often will get that way in architectural design when they start designing, the first pitch when the architect is showing the plans, it's like I'm reacting before the client is. I'm so giddy about it. And I have to remind myself, like, this is not your home.
Yes.
This is their home.
Yeah.
But I still get really excited about it.
And that's funny. I have to do the same thing where it's like, okay, I don't want them to react to my reaction, so I'm going to wait. And then, but it's fun. When you do something that you really love and are excited about it, it's hard not to be enthusiastic.
One thing that, we just recently went through a branding kind of regroup for my own company, deciding whether to rebrand, keep the name, change the name. I've been building for 18 years. And so it's like, well, 20 years from now, is someone going to buy my company because it's called Mark D. Williams Custom Homes? And long story short, we decided to keep it. But I see, obviously, yours is the sitting room. Tell me about the origin of your name.
So funny.
You have to make this name when you're very young, right?
Well,
you're in your young 20s when you decide to make this. And if you're anything like me, you probably weren't thinking about selling it 40 years from the time you make it. You're like, can I make it 1 year?
Right, exactly.
How did you come up with the sitting room? It's a very fitting name.
I'm glad you think so.
I like
because it sort of happened by default.
Okay.
Really, it was. So when I started my business, I went through that whole exercise, and I was young. What am I going to call it? And I decided KR Design, Kate Regan Design, pretty basic. And then when I shared the space with the remodeler, he said, we need to have a sign. We need a sign. We need just a generic name for both of our businesses. It's not going to be our legal business name, but it's just the name of our space. So he was throwing out all these names that just weren't hitting. I was like, oh, that's not working. And he mentioned the sitting room, and I said, okay, I can live with that. Yeah, we'll keep that.
So it was kind of like a joint space name that you guys had?
Yeah. It was really bizarre.
That's unique.
It was. So then he left the space, and so then I just took it over. So then it was just me. So then I had a choice to make. Do I want to keep the name? And I'd been there long enough. And when I moved to Excelsior, I thought maybe now's the time for a name change. And, people, when you've been in business for a while, they recognize the name. And I thought, well, there's value to that. I'm going to keep it. And so it's just, that's
what
how it came to be. Yeah.
That's funny. And how long has your logo, because I like your logo, you have the bird, on the sitting perch. Has that been the logo since day one?
No, the logos I've had that for quite a while, different iterations. And it's funny you talk about rebranding, because now after 20 years, I'm thinking, gosh, my business is not what it was 10 years ago.
Right.
I have, new designers, new team. So I'm kind of going down that path myself. And it's interesting. It's an interesting exercise.
Yeah.
So
now, because I kind of shared this thought that, for me anyway, I hope my kids don't want to become builders, because it's very difficult. It's very rewarding, but it's a very difficult industry we're in. Very, very emotional, but it's really neat to be able to drive by a home and say, you built that.
For sure.
And so it's a hard thing to let go of, but also a difficult career. I guess my question to you is, what are your long-term ambitions? Would you ever sell your business? And if so, who would be would it be someone from the internal team? How I've never actually asked this question before, because so many designers, like builders, I think of other designers I know where it's their name.
Sure.
And, I have to imagine, that's got to be a difficult thing. But in your case, you have a studio storefront, you have, retail, and you have a very established brand in Excelsior. Right. I've got to believe that's very appealing to someone that would like to, move in. Have you ever had anyone try to offer to buy you or anything like that?
It's funny because my husband and I talk about this too. He has his own company and talks about, just that being the ultimate goal, right? You develop your company, you sell it. It's different for designers because, anybody can go and start their own firm, but it's a long process. So you're right. There's value in that for somebody to come in and say, you have all the resources set up, you have the systems in place, you have the staff. So I don't know. I'm not there yet. I feel like I could keep working until I'm 75. I don't know. I really love it. And I think I would be just kind of lost without my business. Yeah. So, and I look at, my kids are 16. In 2 years, I'm going to be an empty nester. Right. And so I'll have, even more time. So I don't know. And one of my daughters is showing an interest. Who knows if she'll take this path or not. But that could be kind of a cool thing if that happens. But I don't know. We'll see.
That's really neat. I mean, it's, I have no, interest in selling at this point. Actually, I did have a company approach me about 3-4 years ago.
Really?
And they didn't come out and say it, but they basically wanted to know what interest I had in. They never came out and said it exactly, but the temperature read I got was, we like what you do. They're, a pretty big company, and I could tell that I felt like they wanted me to lead, a team. And I think they were gauging how viable was I on my own. And it was a time in the market right before we took it we had a few bigger projects, and it was right before I'd say, we really launched wings and kind of went to a different strata where our clients took us.
Right.
And I took it as, as a flattering thing, but I've often wondered that I always got my mind kind of spinning a little bit, like what is the long-term plan here? Yeah. And so anyway, it's a hard thing to think about.
It is.
It's not like you're selling a building or a set process or a bunch of widgets or a patent on something. It's, we are our own brand.
Right. So, and when you've built it, it would be a really hard thing to step away from that and watch someone else take it. Yeah. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. I think for myself, I think what I've come to the conclusion in thinking about is just that I think if I could develop a system, and then essentially if I could find someone, let's say, younger and ambitious, let's say I'm 55, something like that. And let's
55?
I don't know. Wow. I want to retire when I'm like 65. So just say, about 10 years before you want to retire, can you find someone who's kind of up and coming, they're real, you see, man, this person really has it going on. Right. And, can you promote them from within? Because it seems like they would have a much better way of keeping the company intact. I'm just thinking like, if you had a couple, younger designers as they grow up, become senior designers, they've seen the whole team, do they want to join forces together and say like, hey, we want to have a partnership and have a design studio together? And I don't know.
Who knows? It's interesting because the designers that I currently have, a lot of them have been on their own. Yeah. And they have said, I don't ever want to have my own company again. Because it's a lot of work. And I think when you're a designer, you want to focus on designing, right? And so for me, I can only take on so many projects a year because I have all the other responsibilities that frankly aren't always as fun. Right. But I'm motivated
you're
by
running
it.
A business.
Right. I'm motivated by it. I love the idea of growing my business and seeing where it's going to go and new business development. But I think if, for designers, it's like they want to do what they love. So
that's a great question. How much of your day, or let's say a week, is spent on running a business versus designing?
I probably focus more on the designing because it's what I enjoy more than I should. Yep. But it's daily. I mean, it's calls with the accountant. Yep. It's checking your books. It's all that stuff. Yep. It's managing the team. So it's every day is different. But I mean, it's important that I do projects because it is. If I wasn't doing that and just running the business, I wouldn't have the enjoyment.
Yeah. And that's interesting. That's interesting that you've had kind of, solo operators that have joined a business because they didn't want to have to, deal with the business side of it. They wanted to just design.
Yeah, which I actually appreciate that because they understand what it takes.
Right.
Right? So it's not like, They just have a good understanding of that.
I have actually both of my project managers have owned their own companies for over a decade.
Really?
And one of them was a framer for 17 years and decided, 20 years, and then decided, he didn't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And so we hired him on as a project manager. But, I think his skills as a framer obviously are very advantageous towards obviously running a construction crew, of course, but also understanding, like, he understands that it's not easy to run a business.
Yeah.
If you had a business that operated for 20 years, you were doing something right.
Right.
I mean, that's not that easy.
Yeah.
And then my other senior PM, he said more jobs than, but he's like, I don't want my name on the sign anymore.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm happy to encourage you to do whatever you want. I'll do anything, for you. But, my days of owning a business. And so I think it's just the right person at the right time that fit well with what we want to do too.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
For sure.
Wow. Excelsior, the location of Excelsior, I'm drawn towards it as well. It's funny. I've been looking for an office space, trying to find some place to go. And
are you wanting to move?
Well, I want to own my building.
So do I.
Yeah. And
Let's buy one togetger.
I would do that.
Let's do it.
Why didn't I think about that?
Yeah.
It's actually a great idea.
All right, we'll talk off.
Offline. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Hey, if anyone listening knows of probably about 6,000 square foot, we'll split it in half. We should get a third tenant. We'll do 50-50 partnerships, and we'll rent out the third part.
Okay.
And that way, when we do retire, we can still have some residual income from some extra rental.
I like it.
I never thought of that. Why did
I
I never think about that before?
All right. Any realtors out there? Commercial realtors.
All right.
Yeah.
Or anyone who wants to sell a building to the sitting room in Mark D. Williams Custom Homes.
Right. That just happened.
All right. Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to buy a building together.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
What, you had mentioned a little bit about industry, the design industry. I think the social media, Instagram has just exploded.
Yeah.
It's good and bad. Obviously, everyone has 10,000 pictures that they show you now, good and bad. It gets everyone excited. Everyone thinks they can do it. Same with DIY. The worst thing for me is when someone comes in and is like, oh yeah, I watched this on a home makeover. You should be able to remodel my house for $300, and it's so unrealistic.
And over a weekend.
Yeah, no problem. So, what are some design misconceptions that you see in your field, either from clients or from other designers?
I think for clients, particularly, it's a great tool, right? We sit down with a client and they can pull all these photos. They have designers that they follow. They've really been able to develop their style and understand what they want. So it's a great tool, but I think it looks very easy when you're watching an Instagram video or you're watching someone's story, and there's just so much more that goes into it. So I think it can be sort of a detriment to us in that respect. And then certainly with the internet and being able to shop online and, just trying to navigate that as well. That's something that we definitely have to deal with, and, just kind of focus on the fact that, we're here, we're working directly with you. We're making these selections for you. We handpicked that. So yes, you could find it somewhere else, but we're the ones that are finding that for you and sourcing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer. We get that all the time. Why can't I buy this? And it's like, well, for instance, plumbing fixtures, as you well know. I had a client one time that wanted to buy this copper sink down in Florida, and in that specific example, we let them do it. It was a handmade sink. We were never going to get it anywhere else. This artisan created it, so it was kind of a one-off. But I'll get people that'll say, hey, there's this this plumbing fixture that's $350, and I can buy it for $298. Like, great, you saved $2.
Yep.
But my plumber won't warranty it.
Right.
When it comes to the job site, where's it being located? Is it lost? Yeah, you open up the box, there's parts missing. Well, who's going to get it? It just becomes a colossal nightmare.
For sure.
And one thing I really appreciate worth working with you, let's use light fixtures for an example. Yeah. You guys come in, you label them for the electricians, you walk, you have a big walkthrough with the electrician, with the client. You're talking about hanging heights and all, you're sourcing all of that information, and it makes the build so much quicker. And I think that value doesn't get expressed well enough on the front end to the client.
Yeah.
Where do you think we fail at that, both as a designer and builder, to explain the value that we bring outside just the cost of XYZ product?
Yeah. That's interesting, because it would be beneficial, right? To be able to lay that out so that they do understand it. I think some people do. But certainly there are other clients that just think, well, if it's just a matter of ordering it, I'll get it sent to me. But what they don't realize is, I mean, I have a full-time expediter that all she does is track orders to make sure if there are back orders, we're aware of it. Because with a build, you know, you have deadlines. You have to have your product in. So there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes.
Do you think when do you think, I mean, just thinking about this out loud in a joint venture, you know, let's say obviously it's probably not the time to, and maybe it is the time to do it. The first interview we ever have.
Yeah.
Hi, you know, so-and-so, here's Kate Regan from the sitting room. You know, I'm Mark. We'd like to work with Kate. You know, you'll walk through your credentials. Maybe not that right meeting, because the last thing you want to do is probably get right into, you know, bookkeeping work on the first meeting.
Right.
But like, you know, would it be like a common ask question sheet and like you give it with them as a takeaway? Does it live on the website? I mean, I think those two examples that I just mentioned, one with the lighting and explaining a little bit all the things that has to go into that. That's all part of the service.
Right.
And then plumbing. I mean, I think it's important for me, you know, more and more people are saying, well, why can't I just buy that online?
Right.
And, you know, we had someone do that once, and then it came time to deliver it, and they're like, I don't know when it's coming. And, you know, the last thing I want to say is like, see, I told you, because, you know, that's not really what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to build your home, you know, with talented partners to make it beautiful, because we all have the same common goal, right? You want to design something beautifully. I want to build it, you know, to the best of our ability, and we want to create something, right?
Right.
Kind of going back to the picture thing, and this is something my architects kind of talk more and more about as I listen to them, is sometimes I feel like all the photo generation limits creativity. Do you think that's true?
There is truth in that. Absolutely.
Because they're saying like, here's the photo, build that.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because you and I have talked about that, where you don't want to have a copycat home. And that's what happens. People are taking, so I think it's our job, like the design team, to say, I love that. That's a great look, but let's just modify it slightly so that it's more custom for your home, because you do run the risk. And then where are the new ideas being generated? So I think it's a good launching off point, but I think it's important to modify it so it's custom. Do you feel that each client, you kind of have to gauge their personality to see how receptive they are going to be towards, you know, a radical idea? Yes, absolutely. I mean, some clients will say, I hired you for a reason. Right. I trust you. I love your work. Go for it. Right. Do what you do, which is amazing, right? That's the dream. That's what you want. And then when it's almost added pressure, because then you just feel like you want to go so far overboard to make sure that they're so happy to prove that you're worthy of that trust. So those are really fun. But I also like collaborating with clients. I like it when clients come in with a vision, and it's fun to feed off of each other. And I think the design takes on a life of its own in a way that if I had just been solely responsible for it, it wouldn't have gone there. So I think it's refreshing to have both. I would agree with that statement. I love playing off the energy or ideas of another person, right? I don't necessarily feel like an original creator, but there are times where like someone will say something and it's like, oh, and you get this great idea and you're like, this may fall on its face, but here you go. What do you guys think of this? Yeah, exactly. And then ultimately as a team, you'll kind of pick it up and it'll kind of come together. That's why I say building is art. It's not science. So I mean, to me, this is not a bunch of zeros and ones that, you know, you get an output. So, and it evolves, right? Like you think you want one thing and then it can kind of take on go down a different path. So again, I think for clients to understand that, and after doing this for so long, I try to explain that to clients too. Like, it's okay. It evolves. It's a process, and you just have to accept that. I think where we get into trouble is if clients are just very rigid with this is how it's supposed to be. And sometimes it ends up going in a different direction, and you know, oftentimes for the best. I think the most difficult sometimes is not, you know, one person will feel that way, but sometimes if the couple is not in unison or locked up, and usually they are. I mean, you know, they usually, at least our clientele to this point from a demographic standpoint, they've been together usually for a while. We do a lot of stuff for empty nesters. Not that it has to be that way. We're doing stuff for younger couples too, but it just seems like a lot of our clientele are just more mature. They're more relaxed. They kind of know what they want. This is not their first rodeo. Either, not all of them have built before, but they've definitely have owned multiple homes. So they feel more settled in what their style is. Right. And I think they also are settled more in who the decision maker is. Some of the projects that have been
more difficult are where there's some obviously contention between the spouses or the partners, and that always is a little uncomfortable of how to navigate those waters, especially if one of them has a good idea and the other one has a bad one. You're like, well, and I found that for me, I mean, you want to be diplomatic, obviously, at the end of the day, you just are honest. I mean, today someone had me out on a remodel appointment, and the architect was really talented architect and really nice client, and I think they wanted me to listen for a long time, and I listened for a little bit, and I said, do you just want me to be how basically on what level of honesty do you want here? And they're like, that's kind of a loaded question, right? And they're like, uh-oh, and they're like, pretty honest. I'm like, this is not a remodel. This is a tear down. And so I think obviously you say it in a nice way, and you say it in a way that can be received, and sometimes you can apply it with a joke or some context that lightens the mood a little bit. But do you find that that's true in design, that there obviously you have to be really honest? And I assume there's certain things that you're fighting for, right? Certain ideas that you're like, I'm going to fight harder for this idea for XYZ than some of those you're like, I'm just going to let that go. I'm not that passionate about it.
Exactly. And we always say, I mean, there are so many different ways. There's so many options, right? We're looking at light fixtures. We have 5 of them. They all work. I like this one in particular. I think this one would be the most successful, but they all work. But there are certain things that if a client brings an idea that you just think, this is a departure from our overall style, it doesn't fit with the architectural style of the home, that's when it's our job as a professional to say, this isn't right. And here's why I think that, and let's try to incorporate that idea in a different way. But that's why they hire us. I mean, it's if we didn't do that, ultimately our name is on the project and it's not successful.
I think they also respect you for it the more.
Yeah,
I mean, the more times that you kind of fight for it, and I've often told people that I'll push back about 3 times, but after that, like I'll build you anything you want.
Right.
And so if you want this, I'll build you that. But no, I don't think this is a good idea, and here's the reasons why. Yeah. And at the end of the day, if you're like nevertheless, those are the 3 things I want. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
It's
Ultimately,
it's
it's
your
their home.
And I will build it for you.
Yeah.
So, and I don't have an issue with that.
Right.
Interesting. What if you could go back to the beginning? This is kind of a tough question sometimes, but what would you tell a younger Kate Regan about design and owning a business?
That's a great question. It's interesting because I just recently talked to someone who's in college and she's thinking about making a shift from her major into focus on design. Yeah. And I have said, I think having a business background, having some experience in that, I think that's key. I also think finding mentors is so important. I mean, to have someone who is experienced that you can go to for guidance when it comes to the business side of things or design. But for me, primarily the business, because that's not something I had a background in. And so you kind of learn as you go. I'm sure you find that too. Yep. And you're in all aspects. HR, accounting, I mean, every single marketing, all of it. So I think really just making sure that you find your advisors, you find your people, and then really just kind of trusting your gut and not looking back and not learning from mistakes as they happen, not beating yourself up, and just being willing to learn and, evolve as the business grows and what to do with it.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah. There's so many more questions I want to answer or ask you, and we don't have that much time. We're going to have to bring you on another time. Okay. One of my parting questions is, outside of work, what do you do for enjoyment or kind of refilling the emotional fuel tank?
Well, like I said, I have 16-year-old twin daughters, and that is a joy and a delight.
16. Nice.
Oh, it is great.
Are they identical?
No, they're fraternal. Yeah. And they are yin and yang. They're so different. So I spend a lot of time, I'm working full time. So I have to, focus on that and family stuff. And we love to travel. I mean, I need my downtime. So I love to read. I'd love to binge a good show. Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of our life. And right now it is very focused on just raising these teenagers and surviving that.
What is that's funny. And like you said before, in a few years, it'll be empty nesters. You have all this time. You're like, now what do I do with all this time?
I'll find a hobby. I don't know.
What, from a book standpoint, just because I'm always interested in what people are reading. I mean, do you do pleasure? Do you do for business? Do you do audiobooks? Do you do a little bit of everything?
Mostly fiction. I mean, for me, I need to shut it down.
It's your downtime.
It really is. Yep. And I am more of an introvert. So all day I'm on. I need just quiet time, and I need to distract myself and just kind of go somewhere else. So that's primarily it's sort of my downtime.
Yeah. No, I think that's super important. Everyone, I mean, for me, it's, activities or it's, I need exercise.
Right. I wish I could say, I could have lied and said, that's what I do. But
I ran into the other day, your tries, they're pretty ripped still from your dancing days.
Yeah.
So,
right.
Well, thank you very much for coming on. Where can our listeners find you in the sitting room?
So the sitting room is located in downtown Excelsior, Design Studio, 382nd Street, and 206 Water Street is our retail boutique.
Very good. And then we'll have all the Instagram handles and websites on our show notes. So if you want to know more about Kate Regan in the sitting room, you can look there. Thanks for coming on today, Kate.
Thanks,
it was
Mark.
great to have you.
That was fun.
Hey, look, let me know when we find a building together.
I will.
All right.
I'm on it.
All right. Thanks.